October 3rd, 1961. That's the date we were first introduced to the mythical world of Rob and Laura Petrie, their son Richie, and their next-door neighbors and best friends, Jerry and Millie Helper, all living the good life in 60s suburban New Rochelle. But for the first time in television sitcom history, we not only saw Rob's home life, we also saw where he worked, and were given a backstage look at the production of The Alan Brady Show, a show Rob co-wrote with Sally Rogers and Buddy Sorrell, and which starred the obnoxious, offensive, and egomaniacal Alan Brady. Today we celebrate the 60th anniversary of this timeless series and the indelible mark that it's made on entertainment culture. Through both recent and archival footage and interviews, we'll reminisce with those who were there at the time, as well as those who are members of the Dick Van Dyke Show second-generation family. So join us as we take an appreciative and affectionate stroll down Bonnie Meadow Road and beyond.
The Dick Van Dyke Show, starring Dick Van Dyke, Rosemary, Maury Amsterdam, Larry Matthews, and Mary Tyler Moore.
It all began with the genius and creativity of Carl Reiner, who chose to have a conversation with himself one day on the way home from work. Encouraged by his wife Estelle and pondering the question of what ground do I walk on that no one else does, Carl arrived at the idea of creating a sitcom that would take us inside the writer's room of a television show and give the viewer insight as to what the dad's work life was really like, something completely different from the other Hi, Honey, I'm Home sitcoms of the era. Reiner's attempt produced Head of the Family in July 1960, and it did not fare well. Thankfully, a meeting with Sheldon Leonard was convened.
I thought that Carl was not exactly right for it, and he fortunately agreed with me, and we both decided that Dick Van Dyke was closer to the concept that we had in mind, and that was it. So it was my responsibility to get the show staffed, to put it on the air, and to see it properly launched, which responsibility I was happy to undertake and to accomplish.
Reiner, Leonard, Van Dyke, and money man Danny Thomas formed Calvada Productions, an entity which still exists today to manage the affairs of the show.
Calvada, it was a combination of CA for Carl, L for Leonard, VA for Van Dyke, and DA for Danny.
As an inside joke, there were often hints at or references to Calvada.
Carl, again, was, with his perverted sense of humor, he kept retreating to calling everything that could bear the label Calvada.
And of course, there was Big Max Calvada, played by Sheldon Leonard himself, in the episode of the same name.
My name is Maxwell Calvada.
The concept of a show in which a hoodlum, bullied and intimidated the staff of the show seemed like a good idea for an episode. So once the character was decided, they also decided that I'd have to play it.
My dad was situation comedy genius. He really believed in giving people opportunities, and he really recognized social wrongdoings, and he was a good person. Carl was a very close personal friend of our family. We loved him and Estelle.
Sheldon had the ability to enunciate mispronunciations very clear. He didn't mispronounce, but he had a kind of a Damon Runyon-esque quality. And he always finished a sentence in this rhythm, even though you knew what he was going to say when he said it, but you never interrupted him because he always had a good thought in his head. Pragmatically speaking, that would be a big phrase of his, and he had a very, very bright mind. He was a wonderful executive producer. He executive produced 5 shows at one time. That was pretty damn good.
I like your collective style. It's neither too esoteric nor too mundane. Pragmatically speaking, hits me right in the gut.
Going to the show was always fun. We were seated on the bleacher seats, as I recall. The half-hour show would probably take triple or quadruple the time to film, as people would go out afterwards. And I think my dad probably often went out with members of the cast. He was a giant in the field of situation comedies and created some shows that are still respected and watched. And I still get residuals from that.
Sheldon and Danny's presence would always be felt by the cast for the 5 years of the show as a result of the photos of the two of them that perpetually hung over the couch in the writer's room. With Calvada Productions now firmly established, Carl Reiner was well postured and ready to launch the Dick Van Dyke Show.
My early memory of my father is just him sitting at a desk writing. So for those first 6 years, he was in his office upstairs behind the typewriter and writing. He asked my mother, well, what should I write about? And she said, well, write about something you know. He knew this experience of being in the writer's room and making a television show, and he knew being married and having a family. And so he wrote 13 episodes of the show, not knowing that, I guess, you're supposed to just write a pilot and see if it works, and then write 13. He was always very grateful for what he was given. His life could have been something completely different if he didn't have the support of the government, the WPA program, and then the military who helped him at Georgetown and steer him towards entertainment in the Second War. He never duped himself into thinking like, this all happened because of me, only because of me. And I think that's why he maybe stayed humble. When people would ask him, what's the thing you've done in your life that you're most proud of? He would say, my children. And I think that many people of his generation and upbringing and kind of career trajectory would not necessarily say that. I mean, surprisingly, they would jump to, well, this film was my best thing, or this thing was my best thing. He would always say, meeting Estelle, choosing the right woman, having 3 children that he loves. He would say that was his greatest achievement. And then career-wise, he would say the Dick Van Dyke Show. The situations hold up because they're all based on human feeling. And I remember him saying he didn't want any slang. He didn't want to use any vernacular of the day because he didn't want it to feel dated. For me, watching the show, it's like watching my family. I mean, Rob is like my dad. Laura's kind of like my mom. I guess Richie's my younger brother, although he's named after my cousin Richie, and then Mel, all these, it's like a family. So I do often like the ones where I feel, oh, that's, I can see that. I mean, my father's energy and Dick's energy somehow is so similar. I think he was just very grateful to find him. I think Dick really, I've heard him express in front of groups of people how grateful he was to my father for giving him this role and giving him this career. And he just walked into this like a perfect suit, like it fit perfectly. And when you see him in that suit, and he wears that suit so perfectly, and then in this role he's playing, it's like it's him. It's really him. He knew that you could come up with an idea how it could be so crazy, but it itself might not be the one that you end up using, but it might lead you. It might be on the way to the thing you're going to use, the idea you're going to use. So don't stifle it. Don't censor it. In that way, he really did stay like forever young. He stayed young at heart and young in his mind. The Dick Van Dyke Show is definitely what he was most proud of in his working life.
The television viewing public has come to recognize that this is an exceptional group of talents. It was as good an example of on-the-air chemistry as you were ever likely to find.
I was 11, 12 when this first started. and I was the oldest of the kids, so I actually kind of have a sense of the before and the after, that kind of watershed time in his career. He said he was making a pilot, but he didn't make much of it. I think he was meeting Carl, and it just seemed like such a long shot. I think you see all the successful things he did, but people don't understand that for every one of those big roles, he had 10 times where it didn't pan out. We moved to Los Angeles when I was about 11, and shortly thereafter, everybody knew who we were, and we were thrust from kind of normal obscurity of just being the new kid moving around into an entirely different world. Things about privacy and family time and all those, it's the trade-off for all the good stuff that goes along with it. And Carl would bring out his script, and sometimes it wasn't even completely finished. And Carl would tell the idea, and they'd read through it, and then everyone would just fill in the blanks and take turns ad-libbing and doing bits and piecing the show together. And it was amazing to watch the chemistry between them. Carl leading it, and then the support and love they had for each other, and the humor and the energy.
Sheldon was the very beginning of three-camera sitcom, right at the very beginning. And my God, the guy knows his storylines and his construction better than anybody. It was interesting in the first couple of years because Carl, had some kind of fresh ideas and wanted to break the mold a little bit. And those guys used to go at it pretty good in a friendly but really interesting arguments, about what you could and could not do. It was really wonderful to hear him. I learned a lot from him. And of course, Carl, just a genius, that's all. The nicest human being I ever met in my life.
He's just at heart, he is a kid. And he's the carefree, see everything is funny. Always try to see the light side. Using humor as probably the antidote to depression and anger and virtually every negative human emotion. That's who he is. There'd be times when he'd be off by himself, particularly, I think, singing numbers and some dance things. He would spend time at home, and he was, skinny as a rail, but truly an amazing athlete. Still is amazing at 95, but in his, in his 20s, 30s, 40s, he worked out hard to keep his agility and his flexibility and his strength up, because that what looked so natural and just comic was actually something he worked really, really hard at.
I kind of judge shows by how much fun I had doing them, rather than how they look on the air. And my favorite was always, where did I come from? Just for some reason, all the craziness on that show, we just had a ball. We laughed, and of course we changed it every 5 minutes. Every time we'd think of a new joke, we'd put it in. I think it was still in progress when we finally filmed it. We were changing things on the spot, but everybody had a wonderful time.
Kind of holds a mirror up to all of the goofy, funny things everybody does. And I think you see it in him, you go, oh yeah, that's me too, right? The fact that my dad was Rob Petrie in real life can also be said of Rose Marie and Maury Amsterdam. I mean, those two people are two of the funniest people I've ever met in my life. There was a magic in the way that those people related to one another, and they had let the creativity come out. It was just a part of what was so special that everybody connected with the show talks about. There was a warmth and a family thing about the group that was, again, just part of the special chemistry that was the cast of that show.
I often wish that we had the latitude back then, as far as subject matter. God, there's so many subjects we couldn't even touch back then. Carl would have done it well and in very good taste, and I think we could have handled them better than anybody.
The way they worked together shaped some of my management style and technique through the rest of my career. Publicly and privately, my dad says that was the best working environment he was ever in. And I think that view is shared by all the people who are still around and those before we lost them, that it was the most fun working environment they were ever in. It was the chemistry between really special people, and a generosity and a kindness and a love of one another, and just damn good senses of humor.
Mary was 23 at the start of the Dick Van Dyke Show, and Carl heard a ping in her voice. There was something about Mary that struck a chord with him, and she said, he reached out and put his hand over her forehead and said, "Come with me." He led Mary down the hall to Sheldon Leonard's office, and Carl said, "We found our Mary." She was a young girl who grew up always wanting to be a performer, first as a dancer, but then as kind of a star on television. And she went into that audition kind of with this a little bit, walking on air, saying, "This is going to be it. This is going to be my big break. This is going to be the thing that elevates me, allows me to reach my goals." The chemistry between Dick and Mary was such that they knew they had something special. There was even a little bit of a sexual tension, between them, in a wholesome way, the kind of thing that you'd expect between a young husband and wife, but it had really not been explored or presented that way on television. She would always say she's in the presence of these comedy black belts. There was a respect, in that, again, Mary had never done comedy. She was in awe of Carl and Dick and Bill Persky and Sam Denoff and Danny Thomas and Sheldon Leonard and Jerry Paris and Rosemary and Maury Amsterdam. They were open to her. She wasn't just the young ingenue to them. She was a real part of a wonderful ensemble. Mary was so grateful to be in the company of this wonderful group. If you ask Mary about her favorite shows, at least in terms of how she grew, I'd probably say two of them in the first season. Carl and Dick were struck by how extraordinary what Mary could do. Mary turned this situation of a young wife worried about, her husband no longer being as interested in her into this. I think it's a comedic tour de force.
Well, yesterday morning, and I kissed you, and you said, "Don't do that." And you came down to breakfast in your yucky shirt and the orange juice with the flash of bits and seeds and the gray hair and the hormone marks and the general yuckiness.
That was the first time Carl ever gave me the opportunity to take some comedy and run with it. Obviously was pleased with what I did because from that point on, I always had something funny to do in the show.
Curious thing about women, that was another one where she got to play a little broader, a little bit more physical comedy in ways that Dick was so skilled. Those two episodes in the first season, I think she felt cemented her as a comedy lead. She trained to be a dancer. She trained to be in the musical theater. That was her idea of the summit of performance, was live theater, musical theater. Kind of naturally fell into that shared love of dance and musical theater. The sophistication of carrying off the perfectly harmonized and danced performance with her impatience, with Rob, kind of jumping in when she didn't want him to be there to do the dance with her. And it just works so well, and coming to the end where she gives in the obvious connection and attraction that she has, for him. Carl said, "We got something really special for you, Mary. It's great." And then she reads the script and she says, "Carl, I'm barely on camera." And Carl said, "Mary, don't worry about it. It'll be memorable." As they got into it and got through it, Mary obviously recognized how wonderful the device was and how funny it was, and allowed her to show off that she could be amazingly funny and present, even though not seen. Mary was young, but she certainly had extraordinary comic timing. And Mary always talked about the cast of the Dick Van Dyke Show as being her first real family, certainly first family professionally, and how important it was to her, and how she wished it had never ended, and she meant that about everyone. each one of them in their own right had a very special talent, and together exploded on the screen in ways that are memorable.
Everyone was a treasured week working with the production people and the prop people, to say nothing of the actors. We were a real family.
It was just a special moment in the history of television comedy.
Carl was looking for, I think, somebody that had never really done anything and had, just wanted a fresh face. Carl made me lay on the couch and pretend that I was really sick and my stomach was sick. But if I offered you this cupcake, now can you get excited about me giving you a cupcake? And I went, yeah, I can, and okay, do that for me. And my best scene I ever did. It was a scene in Never Name a Duck. It was a very somber moment for Richie, and he was very upset about it.
Rich, the duck doctor said that that's why he was sick, and maybe that's why Oliver died.
You made Oliver die?
Well, could be. See, Rich, we were having so much fun with Oliver, we never stopped to think that maybe he'd have more fun if he was in a pond with other ducks.
But we loved him.
Well, yes, Rich, but that was a selfish love. Maybe we loved Oliver to death.
Can you do that?
So my mother, God bless her, says, go see Mr. Leonard and he'll help you so you can go on and do the same. Sheldon kneeled down in front of me and started telling me this horribly, horribly heart-wrenching story of his best friend ever dog that got killed. Within 5 minutes, I was like, oh my God, that's so sad. And I was crying. And I think that's the best, really scene to scene I ever did in terms of just acting in the show. Another one of my great favorites was the woodpecker script, where the woodpecker kept pecking on Richie's head, and because they wanted the hare to make the nest. And that really happened to one of Carl's neighbors in New Rochelle. That was a real story.
Now tell Daddy, where did you see this woodpecker just now?
Out in the front yard. He came out of the tree. You didn't kill a giant woodpecker, Daddy.
Rich, you know there isn't any giant woodpecker.
Is he all right?
Oh, he's fine, Millie. He saw the woodpecker again.
Yeah, that's the biggest woodpecker I ever saw.
Millie, we're not going to humor him anymore.
Who's humoring him? That is the biggest woodpecker I ever saw. It looked like a glandular case.
Annie was so good at delivering those kind of lines. Dick, I sometimes I wonder if he'll outlive me. He's ageless and he's timeless, and he's such an amazing talent and such an amazing person. I was really fortunate to be the lucky one to be able to work with him. The beauty of Rob Petrie is that Dick Van Dyke is Rob Petrie. It was really wonderful with Dick. Always was ready to help if you needed it, but just kind of went and did his thing and made the rest of the cast kind of comfortable in terms of working together as a unit. He was the catalyst start that kind of then put everybody at ease to do the rest of the show. Mary, I believe, truly loved me. I looked at her as a mother figure, but also maybe a big sister kind of type thing as well. But she was there for guidance when I needed her. She was always very quick to compliment and or to give me advice, good advice. And she was really wonderful to be around every day, just positive and encouraging, and just a really special force.
Mary was, without a question, was really proud of Larry, what he was able to accomplish, on the show. Dick and Mary reveled in Larry's maturation, and they really did care a lot about him and nurture him and help him kind of grow up.
You really had the perfect team together to make the show entertaining, funny, timeless, because that's really the word we're looking at on our 60th anniversary. There's not enough time in the world to say the good things that Carl Reiner deserves to have said for him. But he was very special to me. I don't think genius is a good enough word for him. I think it understates what he really was and what he became and what he brought to the world of entertainment and the history of our world and our country, really.
If you've enjoyed the Dick Van Dyke Show throughout the years, in celebration of the show's 60th anniversary, please consider making a donation to St. Jude Children's Research Hospital. And COLAC will appreciate it as well.
Sheldon had gone to Vegas and had seen my mother. He couldn't believe how strong she was. And he knew that you needed somebody that was going to be really strong. And Sheldon was so impressed with the way she handled an audience, the way she handled everything.
So one day I got a call and they said, they want you over at the Desilu studio. I said, Danny, oh, finally got a show. She says, no, this is for the Dick Van Dyke Show. I was the first one that they cast after Dick. And I met Carl, and Sheldon said, if you want the best, get Rosemary, which I thought was very nice.
As the show evolved and Mary became extremely popular, I remember my mother on the phone constantly saying, we need more office scenes. And I mean, she was fighting. She was always pushing to perform, to show off what she could do, what Maury could do, and even what Dick could do. All of that first year in the living room, that's live. That's Live City.
You know, Maury would say, why don't we do this? Why don't we do that? And I would say, hey, that'd be a good idea to do this, you know.
My father, who was first trumpet on the theme song. Every time I hear the theme song, I hear my father, Bobby Guy, and I can hear his tone. He had a very special tone. I think Carl would come out first and say, welcome to the audience and all that, and then release my mother and Maury to the audience. And they would go. I mean, jokes back and forth. Her legacy is the fact that she's still out there. She's still influencing women to write and to do things on their own. I think that they just wanted to be entertaining and just enjoy watching this group of people do what they do best.
That show has meant a lot to me and to a lot of people. We knew we had something good. We knew we had a good show. We were very, very aware of what we were doing. Nobody thought it would wind up being a classic like it is.
My dad really enjoyed doing the show, but then my dad just enjoyed being with people in general.
Carl said, we got everybody except the guy to play Buddy. And Rosemary, he said, how about Maury Amsterdam? And Carl smacked his head and he said, oh my God, I should have thought of him first. Yeah, that was a lucky break for me, being with such talented people. They were just great. Carl is a genius anyway. He's terrific. And Dick Van Dyke is one of the most talented guys I know. He can do anything. Dick is a very, very warm, nice guy.
Most of the people on the Van Dyke Show he was very friendly with. They all were working primarily to make the show good. Dad wrote most of the stuff that he did with Egan. In fact, in the strips, they would write in Maury does material here. So Dad would write in the material that he would do with him. He contributed quite a bit as far as the jokes and that were concerned.
I was playing myself. I've been a comedy writer all my life. I think anybody who does the thing that they like has got it made.
My dad had that one show they did where he was actually bar mitzvahed on the show.
Carl turns to me and he says, what funny happened at your bar mitzvah? I said, nothing. I was never bar mitzvahed. He says, you're kidding. How did that happen? He says, you're going to be bar mitzvahed. Carl and the guys wrote the show. Carl decided if we're going to have a cantor at the bar mitzvah, I want a real cantor. And he got the guy, and the guy starts singing the prayers, sees this audience of 400 people, and Ham in him came out. He was singing the prayers, and he's singing and singing. And 10 minutes go by, and he's still singing. He stopped for a second. I said, one more time. I never saw any temperament. Nobody ever argued with anybody, never with a cross word. You know, it sounds kind of cliche to say we were like a happy family, but we really were.
Dick Deacon, of course, was a very talented actor for whom I had a great deal of respect.
After Richard Deacon died and we did a tribute to him, it was amazing because he had so many things he did for people that he never let us know about. He supported people who weren't making money. He had friends that, needed help and helped them. He was really a very, very giving guy. He was like a stalwart because when he walked into the room, we knew what he was going to deliver for us, and he was never failed. People really loved Deke. Everybody was very fond of Deke. Rosemary and Maury, they really, as much as Maury screamed at him, they really loved him.
I don't know what it was about Richard, but if somebody had a problem, they always went straight to him. He had a sympathetic ear, or looked like he was wise. He was just a wonderful guy. You know, Rosie's husband died during the show, and he was a rock. She leaned on him, constantly kept her company and supported her. She claims that he brought her through all that.
Deke was very, very close, very good friend to her. They loved each other. They talked like brother and sister a lot. And she would lament to Deke a lot if she was upset or she, things on the show or this and that and the other. They were extremely close.
Richard and I had also a really wonderful relationship. So Richard came from quite a different background than I think everybody else did. Deke was in all kinds of things. I mean, Westerns and guest spots on all shows. He, again, was a very dry, witty comic person. He would get some wisecracks out himself. And he was one of the just loveliest, sweetest, caring people.
Carl had seen Mother in this show that my father actually produced, the Billy Barnes Review. And then I think Jerry kept telling my father, Annie, be perfect for my wife. Annie, be perfect for my wife. And my father finally said, well, get her in. She was perfect. She never had a contract. Carl wanted to give her a contract, but my sister was a baby and she didn't feel like she wanted to have them just give her a line to fulfill the contract needs. She wanted to be in the shows when they would use her character. Yes, I loved visiting the set. I didn't see every episode she was in, but I went a lot. And it was a huge thrill for me. And it was fun because I'd go down and Larry was just a few months younger than me. And so I used to go and play with him and we'd go under the bleachers and swing around and climb on the understructure of the bleachers. And we'd sneak onto the Make Room for Daddy set. Dad used to like to go down to the show too, because he was friends with some of the writers. And of course he was good friends with Jerry. And he would always go on the floor between the bleachers of the set, where all the cameras and the writers were. And then I know that bugged my mother. That always kind of made her a little nervous when my dad was on the floor. She would repeat everything 3 times. And one day, this is a funny story. One day I was in the other room and I think Hallie was watching the Dick Van Dyke Show, rerun in the den.
Jerry, you're just terrible. Isn't he terrible? You're just terrible.
Mother came in. She was in between the 2 rooms. She goes, oh my God, I can't believe I said everything 3 times. Did you ever notice I said everything 3 times? I said everything 3 times. And I was on the floor. Mom had taken out a full-page ad in Variety for that episode. My dad put it together and was like, can you tell the difference between these 2 or something like that? It was a picture of her with Barry. It was very cute. The episode got canceled. I think it was a problem in space. So the ad was for naught. And I know Mother was always so impressed with how well everybody got along. She always felt that everybody was really friendly. Everybody was very cool.
I think that he had a wonderful experience altogether. Everybody would recognize him as Herman Glimcher, and they thought he was on the show all the time. He only actually was on screen, I think, 3 times as Herman Glimcher, but it was talked about so much that they thought they were seeing him all the time. Jerry Van Dyke and Bill, they're having this fight and rolling over the couch. And then Bill slaps the lamp and it falls over. Afterwards, he told me, he says, I think I broke that lamp. And he was very sheepish about it.
The one that he loved the most, that he really thought that he did the best, was actually the bellboy.
You painted it on.
He thought that he was funnier and had more to do as the bellboy, or he got more laughs as a bellboy character than he did in the Herman Glimcher character. I remember sitting in the bedroom cueing him on his lines for when he was in Dear Sally Rogers. When I watch him do it, and I can just picture him saying those lines in the bedrooms, like, watch it, Sally, don't push me too far. Like that. He had to make sure, he would look at himself in the mirror to make sure that his facial expressions were just so right. My dad's favorite part of doing that show was practicing the way down the Swanee River and doing that dance. But he would only do it in the bedroom. He wouldn't do it for anybody else.
My mother's performance was just wonderful. If you're going to be a dumb blonde, she did it brilliantly. But, she did it brilliantly because she was a brilliant actress. There was a lot of woman there. She wasn't a dumb blonde. She gave Pickles heart. She gave Pickles mind. She gave Pickles a complete soul. And I think that's why Pickles kind of lives so brightly, even though it was quite a short time that she was on the show, just a few episodes. And I think it's because of the performance that my mother gave, the life that she gave to Pickles.
To be around all those comics, the wit at lunchtime, fantastic. And I was just sitting there with my jaw hanging down. Here is this great big dumb broad gotten this wonderful break. What a chance it was.
And I do think she was extremely proud of being part of the Pickles, because every time I showed her an episode and was like, look, do you want to watch it together? She was a little bit sad. I don't know if it was because that was the time of her divorce or associating it with not being continued in the show, but it wasn't easier for her to watch it. And I think that's why she felt so honored always when Dick would remember her and come back to her.
Just so cute. She was such an ultimate through and through pro. Her discipline to put out a performance. And that performance, of course, made her a legend. Everybody says, oh my God, you were Pickles. All the work she's done her whole life. She worked for 90 years. And everybody says, oh my God, you were Pickles.
No celebration would be complete without a tip of the hat to Frank Adamo.
Sheldon finally said, well, why don't we let Frank do it? That's how I started with my little bit part.
Frank's favorite episode was his appearance in I'm No Henry Walden.
Mr. H. Houston Thornley. Yes, H.
Yes. I'd like to contribute 2 years of royalties from my last book of poems.
Oh.
Frank also remembers 2 other fun roles that he played.
Robert Petrie wrote a show supposed to be funny, ho, ho, ho. Look how far this man has gotten, writing shows that are really rotten.
That also was one of my favorites because I really stopped the show because I have a terrible voice. During the day, I went to the trainer and I said, look, I want to, get friendly with this beast. I would feed him and kind of walk with him a little bit so he got used to my smell. Jerry Hausner, who was the little guy I was to hand him over to, he didn't want to have any truck with this animal. And when I went out on my cue and went to hand the animal to Jerry, Jerry grabbed the chain and the kangaroo wasted no time. He just went straight cross stage, dragging Jerry with him. And part of the problem was he was supposed to have rubber sole shoes on, but he didn't. So he kind of did a skate walk right across the stage.
Frank recalls an ask of Dick Van Dyke by co-star Maury Amsterdam.
He said to Dick, draw me a rabbi. So, Dick's sweet, innocent man, he draws the rabbi. And the next thing you know, Maury sent it off to Japan, and it comes back as a 3D figure of Mr. Mosley.
Maury cleaned up, and Dick got bupkis.
Just being there was my joyous moment. Everybody just adored everybody.
The production team included the directors, the writers, the musicians, and more.
My first challenge was to find the proper director and continuing director. And in order to do that, I called on my experience with my previous comedy shows, Andy Griffith and Danny Thomas, and used some of the directors, notably John Rich.
One day at a board meeting, Sheldon said, you ever think of coming back to an indoor show? I said, as a matter of fact, I might. What did you have in mind? Well, I got this thing called the Dick Van Dyke Show.
Sheldon Leonard, he had the eye for what was going to work. To work with people like that and the material and the kind of show. And it was so new at the time. It was such a different dynamic than any of the other sitcoms. And the Dick Van Dyke Show was just so brilliant. It was so different from all the 50s comedies.
We have a great love for each other. I think John is one of the best directors that we've ever had, really.
One wonderful story about Dick's ability to handle props. He's the best prop actor I've ever worked with, bar none. I said, here's what I'd like you to do. He'd even take the 12 darts in one hand and fling them all. And of course, in an ideal world, they would stick in the wall, not hit the board. Well, come on. That's really an impossible task. You know, he did it. 12 darts, as I recall, stuck in the wall. Nothing hit the board. I was a taskmaster, I guess, in the sense that I loved my cast, but if I felt that anybody was operating a little under par, I would let them know. I said, no, you don't have this yet. I remember one night on Van Dyke, people are grumbling because it's getting late, and I was too, frankly. But they said, gee, do we have to do this? I said, listen, I don't want you to be embarrassed by your performances when you're looking at it years from now. And who would think they'd be still as popular as they are? We never thought we were doing a classic. We were going to work and making a living. And maybe that's why it's so good, because we were dedicated, to be sure, but it wasn't standing up on a pedestal. We said, let's see if we can do something funny and instructive. I had asked Sheldon and Carl, I have this opportunity to do a feature motion picture at Paramount. I said, well, the show is really, it's in its third year, it's on the rails. I don't think you can do much harm to it. The patterns are well set. And I think almost anybody could direct the show. And I looked around, and lurking on the edge of the conversation was Jerry Paris.
My dad always told me one of the great breaks he ever had was getting fired from the Untouchables. And that opened up the opportunity for the Van Dyke Show.
One thing I remember Dad saying is that Sheldon Leonard came up to him. I thought it was at the track. And he said, I'm doing a new show. It's called The Dick Van Dyke Show.
Jerry was my protege. I broke him into directing and watched over his shoulder for the first couple of years, and I took great pride in his work.
My dad loved the show and loved Dick and the people on it. Now, sometimes I can hit my dad's voice perfectly, and I'll hear it on a recording, and I was like, wow, that sounds like Jerry.
Carl Reiner had some insight and thought that Jerry would be good at this, thought he had some talent, and gave him the opportunity.
Also, there was a feeling like this was a campus. They were all this was the beginning of 3-camera and still the beginnings of television. Like, they let Jerry, the dentist, direct an episode. I mean, you don't hear that all the time.
He begged me for a year or two, let me direct. And it's very hard for other actors that you've worked with to think of you as a director, when especially he was a goofy guy. He was funny and he didn't look like he was a responsible kind of guy. I came to the cast and I said, Jerry's going to direct. They said, really? And they questioned it for a minute, and then the second week and the third week they said, we want Jerry all the time. So Jerry did most of our shows after that.
Carl Reiner was the producer and creator of the Dick Van Dyke Show, and as the neighbor, he said I must have been a little bit frustrated not being able to play the starring roles and what I like to take a shot at directing, so I studied for a year and worked very hard in the cutting room and the writing conference and the story department.
And he turned out to be a sensational director.
He was very inventive, very creative, and had a sense of comedy timing like nobody else. He gave me more things. I was trying to be calm in the kitchen, and I was just leaning on the stove, and I said, no, everything's fine, and she walked out, and I ripped the griddles off the that was Jerry Paris's kind of, he came up with that, and he came up with a lot of them, too.
I do remember, though, it was a very special occasion when my mother would say, well, we're going to go watch the filming of the Dick Van Dyke Show. And because it was on a Tuesday night, it was a school night. These people, they were just a magic mix. Sally, Maury, Dick, my dad, Annie, and then Mary, and Richard Deacon and Carl Reiner. It was very, magical.
My dad was so popular with the cast because as an AD then, he had to get them all together, make sure they're on set. He'd be an incredible organizer. He was always under a lot of questions from the cast. Where am I supposed to be? When do I be on set? When do I go to makeup? He was the guy that had all the answers. He did all the call sheets. He had the call times for everybody. He had to make sure everybody was there when they're supposed to be. As an assistant director, he was also a production manager because he managed the production. Unit production managers was what he segued into, which what he was really, really good at. He was so well respected. He might always have kind of a little tiny chip of his shoulder during that time, and eventually got to direct. But and John Rich was, he was a big guy and he was boisterous. He was always kind of envious of John because he felt like he could have been doing the same thing.
He always wanted to break into directing and be a director, but he had to stop taking the jobs as an assistant and there was a lot of risk and uncertainty.
Jerry he liked working with because Jerry was a very affable guy. He was he had kind of an actor's mentality. He felt like he should have been definitely directing ahead of when Jerry was given a shot. I think part of the reason was they had nobody to replace my dad. He was so good at what he did. Without telling him, I think that my dad said, well, maybe they don't have anybody to replace me. And looking back at it now, that could very well be because my dad was very good at keeping everything in line, everything in budget, everything on time, everybody getting out on time. Well, my dad was an actor originally. He studied acting at Pasadena Playhouse. When he got a chance to them and they said, John, why don't you play this part? He just jumped on it and had such a fun time doing it.
My mother would have a Christmas party. Everyone from the show would come. Rosemary, Maury, Mary, Dick. My mother didn't have a caterer. She had us kids, my brother, sister, and I all dressed up, and we were like the wait staff.
People, they come driving up in their cars. There's no paparazzi, none of that. The neighbors were fascinated by it.
I remember very well, too, with the Dick Van Dyke cast and crew, how much of a family everyone was. The Dick Van Dyke Show was not the first series he worked on, but the first kind of breakthrough with the 3-camera.
There wasn't a writer in the world who didn't write a sample Dick Van Dyke. The very same day that we got a call back from Carl, earlier in the day, we had written a McHale's Navy, and literally from 9 in the morning till 12:30 when we broke for lunch, came back and left his office at 3:30, taking notes on a 36-page script. And we decided at lunch that we can't do this, obviously. We get a call, and Sam says, it's Carl. And then he starts to smile. And I said, what? And he said, Carl said he hated the idea, but he loved the way we wrote, and we can do all the Van Dykes we can handle. That was in the same day that we were ready to give up. And that was, of course, That's My Boy.
I love That's My Boy because it was their first episode for the Dick Van Dyke Show, and it was written on spec.
That was based on my first child being born. While we were there, we got some wrong flowers. And I said, because there was no DNA, and I said, how did they know you got the right baby? That was the origin of that show. But as you know, every show that there was had the origin in someone's life or experience. And that was what I think the great key to it was. We pretty much wrote every show, except for Belson and Marshall. Their shows were as good as you could get. But we rewrote everything. I mean, I remember one night a writer, after the show came, said, I got to be honest with you, when I handed it in, I didn't realize it was that good. I said, I wanted to say it wasn't. Another guy accepted a Writers Guild Award. The only 2 words in it that were his name, There was only one show he wrote that I didn't like, and that was the one with Eddie Hodges. I hated that show, and yet more people have quoted Milk Cake to me than anything else I've ever written.
Hey, what happened to the milk?
Oh, it's all gone. Between Roger and Richie, they polished off 2 quarts today.
Oh, gosh darn it.
What's the matter?
Well, you baked a great chocolate cake and there's no milk.
Oh, I have coffee, dear. I poured it for you.
Well, you never learn anything. This is a milk cake.
Not necessarily. Now watch this.
What? Oh. Oh, what do you know? You drink soda with your peanut butter jelly sandwiches.
Dick, I mean, what can you say? He made everything better than you could invent it. I mean, You couldn't write some of the stuff that Dick did. I remember in the show where Mary's toe got caught in the faucet and Dick was going to break down the door, and he ran at the door and he hit it with his right shoulder and then hurt himself. And then he tried it again, and in midair, he turned around and hit it. You can't tell someone to do that. Carl was the most special person I ever met. He was honorable, he was self-effacing, he was out to give everybody a break. It was really the best place to work ever, Desilu Cahuenga. With no offense to my family and the birth of my children and to my wife and my parents and anybody who I ever met, the Dick Van Dyke Show was the best experience of my life and made everything else better because of it.
Maybe once or twice a month, Dad would have me there in the afternoon after school on show days a lot of the time, which was always fun because, you know, it was by that point, everything was pretty well settled and there was a nice routine. They would do their dress rehearsal in the afternoon and then break for dinner. I remember sitting up in the booth in the back of the theater, which, you know, since it was filmed, there's no switching there. Cam McCullough was the sound mixer, and I got to watch him mix the sound occasionally, or John Choulet was the camera coordinator, and I get to watch him talk to the various cameramen and cue them on their moves and all of that. I actually wasn't there for the filming of Ghost of a Chance, but it was my idea. I guess I was 7 years old, and we were at home one night, and Dad was reading to me from the Golden Book Encyclopedia, which was a pretty common thing that kids had. And he happened to be reading from the book about ghosts. And I was fascinated, and I said, Daddy, why don't you do a show about ghosts? And so he thought about it, and then next thing I knew, he and Persky had written this wonderful episode that was really a fun way to go with ghosts and a good surprise ending at the end. So the other thing I learned was the same things that all the writers learned from Carl Reiner and Sheldon Leonard was about story and character. And that's why, you know, the show continues to be funny to 10-year-old kids and 80-year-old people is the writing. It's all got to start with the written word, and Dick Van Dyke Show had the best writers, I think, ever.
He thought Carl was God, and so was Danny and Sheldon. They really were very inclusive. They wanted these guys, once they knew them, to write for them. They really thought that these young guys were great. I saw one night on television, Mary did something that I had done, and it was kind of unusual. And I said to Gary, you know, you have to start paying me if you're going to use my material. And he said, okay, I'll give you $25, but you have to spot it. I'm not going to tell you. I mean, he even made me, you know, say, I saw that last night. One night I thought I was a little nervous, and I decided to take some tin cans, empty ones, soup cans, and stack them up at the door. And Gary happened to come home when they were up, and they all knocked down. And he said, what was that? And I said, well, if a burglar comes in, I want to hear him. And he put it right in the show. The other one that was mine was I got my toe stuck in the bathroom faucet once, for real. And I was having a hell of a time getting it out. I was trying to soak my foot and he put it right into Mary, give it to Mary. He loved writing for Mary. Carl was a good friend his whole life. I think that's where Gary really learned his trade, working with people like that.
I remember the writing sessions would always begin with Carl saying, you know, what's going on in your life? That's where the ideas came from. He put me together with Jay Burton, and Jay was a very well-known gag writer. Carl had written all the episodes the first year, and he knew he had to get help. So it was between whether he's going to hire Persky and Denoff or whether he's going to hire me and Jay. And he, I think, very wisely hired Persky and Denoff. Carl was a very generous, loving, good, sweet man.
When it came time to decide on the music for the Dick Van Dyke Show, it's no surprise that Sheldon Leonard chose Earl Hagen. Earl was busy writing, arranging, and producing music on the Desilu Cohenga lot for the Danny Thomas Show, the Ray Bolger Show, and in the year preceding the Dick Van Dyke Show, he had penned and whistled the catchy and well-recognized theme for the Andy Griffith Show. A stark contrast to the down-home Griffith music, Hagen explains his idea for the Van Dyke theme.
When we did the pilot for Van Dyke, for some reason or other, I just felt like it would be better to go with a big band sound. And I made a demo of the theme, and I played it for Carl, and Carl loved it.
Hagen ended up composing what is one of the most recognized TV theme songs of all time. Interestingly, the theme evolved from its original incarnation that included bongos, and one that Earl did not fully recollect when asked about it years later.
And I had a friend of mine say, you remember the version you did with the bongos? And I said, get out of here. They recut it and did the version that everybody knows.
Hagen explains the process of how the music was scored, recorded, and performed.
Generally, I'd come in at 6 o'clock with the band, and I would score the 2 shows that we had done 2 and 3 weeks previous. I'd score the bridges and cues and just do it to stopwatch. And then I'd put the band on the stage, and when they started the show, and we would play until 9 o'clock, and 9 o'clock we'd go home. We always played play-ons and play-offs, and we introduced the people, and in between takes, I'd play dance music or something to keep it alive. And if there was a number on stage that required live music, we would do it.
It was discovered in later years that Maury Amsterdam had written lyrics to Hagen's famous theme song, something that even Hagen had not been aware of. In the early 2000s, Dick Van Dyke and his vocal quartet, the Fantastics, started to perform a barbershop quartet arrangement of this version dubbed Keep Your Fingers Crossed. This rendition has delighted audiences at numerous social and charity events and remains a fan favorite today. Here's a snippet of the arrangement as performed by the Thumbless Walnuts.
A smile is just a frown that's turned upside down, so smile when that frown will defrost, defrost. And don't forget to keep your fingers crossed. Boom, boom.
Away from the show in the studio, Earl Hagen and Sheldon Leonard always found time to take a yearly fishing excursion together, and they remained steadfast friends until Leonard's passing in 1997.
The Dick Van Dyke Show. This is Frank Butler. Yes, I was pleased to open the show each week for all of its 5 years on the air. Thank you for giving us 5 wonderful years of laughter.
When we return, some remembrances from guest stars who appeared on the show.
If you've enjoyed the Dick Van Dyke Show throughout the years, in celebration of the show's 60th anniversary, please consider making a donation to St. Jude Children's Research Hospital. And COLAC will appreciate it as well.
I was very excited, very pleased, and very happy, and very scared all at the same time. We had those 5 days rehearsal, which were very creative and wonderful. John Rich was directing. We came up with all kinds of fun stuff during those days. We had to find a kind of balance between this girl had to be, you could see why she was appealing, and yet she had to be a bit of a ditz. But I told Dick, I said, I have great aim, I promise you. I won't hurt you. I won't hit you. I'll glance it off the shoulder. You tell me where, here, elbow. I'll catch it. But I'll get it exactly where that I could pitch every one of those right at him, right here, exactly where. And it worked. Everything worked. We only did it once. We only had those breakaway objects once. It was wonderful to do, and funny, and great people. He was just so extraordinary to work with. So it was just a wonderful kind of exchange. It was fabulous.
The episode that I did was they had told us how their father sleeps in tiger skin or leopard skin pajamas. I think they probably intentionally in rehearsals did not show the pajamas. That I think they wanted to get a real reaction, and I think the reaction that was scripted that they wanted was just awe. Larry pulls down Dick Van Dyke's blankets because he's laying in bed, and he pulls it down, and then I don't know who started to giggle first, but the three of us stood there and we were going, you know. So we went back, you know, tried to do it again, and the same thing happened. We all started cracking up because we're, you know, little kids, and Dick Van Dyke looked funny. Carl Reiner came out, I think, and he told us to think about something really, really, something that would shock you. Is, you know, what if your dog, somebody told you your dog had just got hit by a car, and he said, you know, keep that thought in mind when you look at Dick. So you're not thinking about, so you go, you know, like that. He wanted that kind of reaction, not the giggle.
I felt very fine just being cast as the Mexican divorce lawyer because Carl was a fan of mine, and it was really very easy to slip into that accent. Dick was just brilliant, and everything he did, physical comedy, no one in the world ever did physical comedy as well as he did. Mary, who did not have a background in comedy, she shocked some people by being so authentically comedic, and as you remember, the pace on that show was very rapid. And Mary, with her gorgeousness, she had a much more delicate approach, and a star of a show has got to have that huggability, and Mary had that in spades. So anything coming out of her was sweet and comfortable and easy. Working with Dick Van Dyke was television gold on the one level, and a very easy, friendly, appreciative human being. And this is why people love him.
Loved Dick Van Dyke Show. And it was professional and it was joyful. When I left the studio, I was happy and smiling. Comedy was alive and well. So, and I was glad to be part of it.
Hi, is this Mr. Petrie's house?
Come on in, Laura. Laura? Yeah, her name is Laura, too.
Gary Pierce is very pleased with it. It was only done in 2 takes. So, you know, that made me feel good. The cameras were on their reaction. You know, I had to be the way for them to react. It was a wonderful space because it was of the 3 of us working together and just having fun. I'm very fortunate to have been in their presence. It was such a gift to me. And to have that space to be involved in comedy was so precious to me.
To work with those people, it was like a well-oiled machine. It's like I'd been in the family for years, you know. It was just wonderful. Carl Reiner, genius. They were going around the table to see if anybody could come up with a way to fix a situation. Almost 100% of the changes that they made ultimately was Dick Van Dyke's idea. He would sit there while everybody else was talking, and he was thinking, and he just, what about this? You know, Sheldon Leonard, he was a master actor. I mean, he was just brilliant. He was a very warm and wonderful person. He really was. I'm sure they wrote the song because of my opening song that I did in my nightclub. But I sang that one on key and when I was working in nightclubs. It was just so easy to work with them. I mean, it was a highlight of my life. The best show I ever did.
Working on the Dick Van Dyke Show was most likely the greatest privilege of my television career. As time goes by, it is a real honored thing to be a part of. It was very interesting that it was a half-hour show crammed full of moments. They kept finding moments that could be just a little look or a reaction. I was bumping and grinding, wearing a pith helmet, reciting Shakespeare. That was, I think, obviously my favorite part. Although the giggler was funny, and it was like hardly anything to say because you just had to time it well and drive different people crazy. And then I liked the artist part too, because she was so absolutely had grotesque art. Working with Dick was a constant revelation, and it was like watching someone who suddenly thought of a funny thing and then did it, and that you were there in that moment. I think my most fun thing with Mary is I taught her how to needlepoint, and she became well known for her pillows and things that she made. It was like somebody hit a piñata and all this wonderfulness fell out. It was all part of the Dick Van Dyke Show aura.
I so appreciated that Carl Reiner understood where I was in my career, and he was so generous to bring me into the show. So that's how I got snappy service. And I only had those few lines every time, but I always got a laugh. You know, they had a live audience in that time. It wasn't just the machine doing the laugh track. Dick was a very exceptional and unique entertainer. He had that star quality, as did everybody else on the show. Mary Tyler Moore, and of course, Maury Amsterdam. I mean, he really was a joke machine in real life. You could mention any word or whatever, and he'd have a joke for you. And Rosemarie and Richard Deacon, all absolutely wonderful. The timing that they had, everything worked. And they were so smart too. And to have worked with all these people, I sometimes marvel and how much you learn from them. Working on the Dick Van Dyke Show was an experience I shall never forget, with some of the very most talented people in movies and in television.
Dick Van Dyke Show. God, it was fun. It was actually unlike some other shows that we did. They were just so nice, so like a family, and so professional, and made us feel incredibly welcome. And during the rehearsal period, I came up with a gag.
That's nice. Do you know what we call one of these in England? No, what? A chair.
And Dick said, "Oh, we've got to keep that in. Oh, that's great. That's really funny." I don't know, about 10 years ago, Chad and I were checking in at an airport, and the guy looked at us and he looked at the guitars and he went, "A chair." They said at the end, "Oh, do come back and see us sometime. We'd love to see you again." So we thought we'd take it up on them. We were off on tours and things, and about 6 months later or something, rang up and said, "Could we come?" "Oh, yeah, sure, come by." And the atmosphere was very different. Dick wasn't there. It was very quiet. And then Dick arrived, and he looked upset. It turned out that he'd just come from delivering the eulogy at Stan Laurel's funeral. He was a huge admirer of Stan, Laurel and Hardy, and Stan Laurel in particular. He then had to do the bit of business where he was, I think it's called 1,000 hours, where he has to stay awake for 1,000 hours and be a disc jockey. And he has a paper cup put on a turntable. The turntable's going around, and each time it goes round, he's so tired he misses it. And he was absolutely brilliant. And I watched in awe, and I thought, that is so clever. That's real comedy timing.
I was meeting Carl Reiner, who I thought the world of it. I'm in the presence of one of the greats of Hollywood. He said, "You know, I saw this segment that you did. It was a doctor show. It was wonderful. But you got to tell me, are you Jewish?" And I said, "Do you want me to be?" And he laughed and he said, No. We're trying to cast for a Catholic priest. The scene took place in the men's locker room at the golf course. But interestingly enough, you know, we were drinking beer in that scene. And when the show was finished, the archdiocese came down on them for having a priest drinking beer. We had to reshoot that scene drinking coffee about 2 weeks later. They had this little short priest on the set while we were shooting that scene again. I resented him so badly. How dare they do this? As if a priest doesn't drink beer. Come And it was Rosemarie. Where is that handsome priest you wanted me to meet? One take, I mean, that was it. It was done. You couldn't do it any better than she did it, you know. And I just stood there and smiled. She was one of the great comic actresses, really funny. The whole conception of the show was done so professionally. By the time we got on our feet and were doing it, it was like old home week. It was just a piece of cake. It really wasn't difficult at all. They all wanted me to be good, and they were helping me the whole time. They just brought me in with loving arms, I should say. They really did. Everybody. They couldn't have been nicer to me.
Dick was the be all end all on that show, rightfully so. I think he's maybe the most brilliant performer ever. Everything was right what he did, and it was clever and it was comfortable. My scene, I'm Mary's best friend from college, and Nan is her current best friend who's quite jealous. Nan keeps trying to get in. Hey, what about me? And she was a wonderful foil, wasn't she, Anne? Oh my goodness. She was perfect. She was so good at what she did. Joby was like a friend. I didn't really understand he was a fine painter. I looked and I thought, oh, that's a nice picture of an elephant. Then I found out afterwards, oh, he's a real painter. I really like that. People laugh at me at the coat that I was wearing when I come in the end of the thing for a little scene with Joby. People say, oh, you're so funny, Suzanne, look at that coat you're wearing. Seemed like smooth sailing with the most wonderful group you could imagine. Each one of them a brilliant talent, a fabulous mesh of combination of, people went so well together. The whole cast was just extraordinary.
The twist was the big thing at that time. So Carl says, let him do a twizzle. Do you think he could dance? I got up there and did, everybody starting doing the twizzle. When I was watching them dance, I knew that Dick Van Dyke could do anything. I was surprised at Mary Tyler Moore's dancing ability. Mary Tyler Moore can dance. I had the pleasure of picking my second song, which was This Nearly Was Mine. Earl Hagen did a beautiful job. Dick impressed me very much because there was never a time where he wasn't trying to be funny and inclusive, and he was very respectful of everyone. My time on the Dick Van Dyke Show was one of the most thrilling things I have ever done. They made me so comfortable. It was an extremely proud moment and such an exciting time I had.
I thought of the Spanish language songs that I knew the lyrics to. Cielito Lindo was one of them. Earl said, why don't we make a jazz waltz out of it? Great. Perfect. And by lunch, we had it. It was set. I had half the choreography done to it. I knew the lyrics, and that number was done that quickly. I heard the Doodlin song, Peggy Lee's rendition, and it was so adorable, so delicious, so infectious. The song just spoke to me about what to do with three people doing that number. Story-wise, it had to be something that was effective, and all three of us looked good doing it, that everyone was comfortable in it and having a good time with it just for the story. And it worked. Mary was a really good dancer, and Dick, naturally a wonderful dancer. This is the kind of thing that they could do in a heartbeat. It was my idea, too, to costume it the way we costumed it. Sort of Charlie Chaplin-ish. The audience just loved that whole episode. To me, the most satisfying week in my entire career.
Many of the child guest stars were from the Dick Van Dyke Show second-generation family.
The kids in the neighborhood talent show, the kids were all, imitating some celebrity, right? I think that was then, that was kind of recognizable in whatever it was, early 60s. So.
I was in the talent show episode. I was supposed to be, per the script, a very, very young Elvis Presley type. With the good old spirit gun, put on big, long sideburns, and gave me a guitar and just had me strum like crazy.
I had no idea what to do. I was horrified. The idea of walking onto the set with that cast of people and not doing something incredibly stupid was intimidating as hell. My brother was, more eager. He knew he wanted to kind of make a run at something in show business. I think I was more ambivalent about it. I think I had a good sense that I had absolutely no talent, and there was no sense in struggling, in a shadow that's cast as broadly as my dad's, and without the talent to go along with it.
I think it was often that they'd have the script reading, and then my dad would say, "Oh, I think there might be an opportunity, or maybe you could be in this show." I was dressed up as a ballerina, and I guess I could do some kind of dancing talent. They put me in the Christmas show. I think I'm there waving from the sled. I'm the school scene where Rob Petrie comes to the school for the day, or the birthday party. And that's where I have a credit. And the very interesting thing about the script for that was he dresses up as a clown. I think my line was, daddies are not supposed to be clowns, they're supposed to be lawyers.
Daddies are lawyers and bus drivers and riders.
I was probably 8 years old. What's a lawyer? I don't know what a lawyer is. Well, long story short, I ended up becoming a lawyer. I went to law school.
Me and Cornell Chalet and another actor, young child, we were all 7 or 8 years old, had like one line, and that was my first job ever in life as a professional.
Oh, you know who else is in that show who's like taped around the fireplace, whatever? My cousin, Michael Choulet.
And he was screaming, and that was part of the premise. The screaming kid who was tied up, but it was a horrible screeching scream that made it unbearable to be around the set and unpleasant. And it was not to be honest with you, it was not a fun experience because of that.
How can you keep screaming like that?
I was a very quiet, inhibited, shy kid at 7 years old, and I didn't like all the chaos.
I had trouble with that because I was never that kind of a crazy kid. I was very studious.
Looking back, it was a great experience, but at the time it was pretty crazy.
It was a great privilege to be part of the Dick Van Dyke series.
Cornell was probably my first crush as a kid. She doesn't know that probably, but she might know.
Although not an instant success, The Dick Van Dyke Show gained an audience following its first season during summer reruns and was quickly appreciated as smart, funny, and entertaining television. The cast were often the subject of national and international magazine covers and articles, ranging from TV Guide to TV Radio Mirror to Cosmopolitan to the cover of the Sunday TV listings. Even before the show wrapped its original network run, its popularity had it airing during the morning and afternoon hours in the form of the Dick Van Dyke Daytime Show. The show has aired steadily in syndication around the world and in many different languages. It has never been far from the public's memory, as evidenced by continual references throughout the last 60 years. Dick and Mary had a look back at the show in 1969's Dick Van Dyke and the Other Woman, and they reprised their Rob and Laura characters on their separate variety shows. The Mike Douglas Show afforded the chance for Dick, Rose Marie, and Maury to reunite in 1979, while Dick was co-hosting with Mike. In 1992, the full cast was reunited for the first time since the show completed its network run to help raise funds as part of HBO's Comic Relief. Coyne Stephen Sanders and Ginny Weissman published The Dick Van Dyke Show, Anatomy of a Classic, and Vince Waldron penned the official Dick Van Dyke Show book. Rose Marie and Maury Amsterdam partnered as Sally and Buddy on a 1993 episode of Herman's Head. In the early 90s, Dick Van Dyke became chairman of Nick at Night to preserve our television heritage, with The Dick Van Dyke Show being one of the network's staple programs. Maury and Rose Marie made a special guest appearance with Dick Van Dyke on The Tonight Show with Jay Leno. In 1994, CBS aired The Dick Van Dyke Show Remembered, a retrospective on the show hosted by veteran CBS newsman Charles Kuralt. The program featured new interviews with the cast members as well as favorite clips from the show. A Dick Van Dyke Show newsletter called The Walnut Times, a tribute to the famous It May Look Like a Walnut episode, began publication in 1995 and ran for 20 years. Also in 1995, Carl Reiner returned to his role of Alan Brady on an episode of Mad About You, winning an Emmy for Outstanding Guest Actor in a Comedy Series.
First of all, we were all fans of the Dick Van Dyke Show and certainly all fans of Carl. So to sort of be blessed and have him, just by him associating with the show, it was very validating and flattering and wonderful. From what I understand, he had many times declined to be on a sitcom, but when he was approached with the idea of being Alan Brady, that really tickled him. It was a great badge of honor that he trusted us and enjoyed what we did enough to come play with us. The volley of getting to play net game tennis with Carl, like where, who, he, that was just a comedy thrill for me. And there were a couple of nods within it. Helen did Rob, but it was Paul. And I think Carl did a thing where he sidestepped, or maybe we did it as a teaser or as an afterthought where we jump around the ottoman.
The continued popularity of the show prompted the creation of both DVD and Blu-ray box sets, both of which continue to be available today. Only a few years later, in 2003, the show was honored by TV Land with the TV Legend Award. The reunion of the principal cast members was the impetus for Carl Reiner to begin work on The Dick Van Dyke Show Revisited, a 2004 CBS Network special ultimately billed as the 159th episode of the show. The show received a Primetime Emmy nomination for Outstanding Special Class Program and was watched by over 14 million viewers. Also in 2003, the spirit of Alan Brady lived on with the creation of The Alan Brady Show, an animated feature on TV Land that featured the voice talent of Carl Reiner. Dick Van Dyke and Rose Marie also participated with small voice roles. 2011 introduced Dick Van Dyke's autobiography, My Lucky Life in and Out of Show Business, which prompted a surprise reunion of Dick and Mary on a recreation of the Petrie living room on The Rachel Ray Show. In November 2017, the New Rochelle City Council unanimously agreed that given the Dick Van Dyke Show's reflection of and impact on American culture, it would be fitting that an honorary street name be given to Bonnie Meadow Road. The road was ceremoniously renamed Dick Van Dyke Show Way. Fast forward to 2020, and Disney's WandaVision was significantly influenced by the 1960s sitcom genre, getting direct advice from Dick Van Dyke himself on how his show was done. Interestingly, the famous Walnut episode is prominently featured in one of the episodes, allowing whole new generations of TV viewers a visit to the Twilight Zone. Many writers claim to have been greatly influenced by Carl Reiner's creative genius and mastery of story structure.
I just did a show last year. I produced that Mad About You reboot. And this is 60 years after the fact of the Van Dyke Show premiering. And I'm in that room 60 years later going to the writers, well, on the Van Dyke Show, they did this. And on the Van Dyke Show, they did this. So I'm holding up a 60-year-old piece of entertainment as sort of a gold standard of what we should do now and what we could learn from.
Other celebrities have also been impacted by the Dick Van Dyke Show's influence.
I always say to people, I'm an atheist, but I say Dick Van Dyke is my religion. I like the one where he gets accidentally hypnotized and he's roaring drunk when he hears a bell. Who could do that? Nobody but him could do that. I used to even say in my act sometimes that I was going to make my living room like the Dick Van Dyke Show living room.
I always loved the delicious timing on the Dick Van Dyke Show. Everyone was right there, like machine guns. It was just incredible, incredible.
So why has the show remained viable and endured for all of these 60 years?
The brilliance of Carl and then all the people involved with it is why we've been successful. We worked as a family. We loved each other. And I think that holds up on camera.
Many of the episodes, most of them deal with the kind of essential emotional terrain and foibles of human beings.
Carl had a way of bringing out the best in people. He unleashed everyone's creativity.
Those elements of love, respect, grace, gratitude, authenticity, you sprinkle that with the genius of all of them. And of course you have timeless brilliance.
There was never an ensemble until the Dick Van Dyke Show. And that's what makes that show what it is and one of the best.
They were working with things that happen to everyday people. It's contemporary in that sense, in that people can understand the essence of every script.
That time in the 60s, it was the hip show. And I think it resonated and has kind of kept that cachet of cool all this time.
The comedy is pure and funny and not dated. It's timeless.
It's the talent of the writing, it's the talent of the actors, and the poignancy of the episodes.
There were no jokes on the Van Dyke Show. There was something that had to be said, but what it was funny. It was organic.
Dick Van Dyke was natural. It was exactly how people lived and how they thought and how they spoke.
This was a show that was a genuine, funny show. And I think that's why it's lasted as long as it has, simply because it was that real.
The writing is spectacular. The acting is brilliant. You love the Petries in New Rochelle.
The secret is Dick. Dick Van Dyke has that sweet personality.
When you have an entire cast of people who were obviously enjoying one another's company, you're going to have magic happen.
The underlying premise is you want to be there. You want to open up your heart in your living room to these people. Let them in.
Fans continue to come together to talk about the show using social media and other 21st century technologies. And many are thrilled to learn that some original artifacts from the show are still in existence. Remember that famous Artanis painting that Rob purchased by accident in the masterpiece? Art director Ken Reed actually painted 2 different versions of the painting for the episode. Fortunately, producer-writer Sam Danoff had the sense to retrieve these works of art from the dumpster before they found a permanent home in a landfill, and they are now in the private collection of Sam's son, Doug. Sam also rescued, and Doug still has, the infamous squirt gun painting created by Rob and Carpetna at the end of October Eve. Carl and Dick also signed the painting. Also in Doug's collection, the prop record that was created for use in the Bupkis episode. Tony Paris and Benjamin Chalet each have an original director's clapper, courtesy of each of their dads, and Tony has what was referred to as a butt can, acknowledging the fact that so many of the cast and crew were cigarette smokers. Writer Carl Kleinschmidt still has the Rob Petrie for Councilman poster, and writer Dale McCraven has the seemingly indestructible United States brooch, albeit with nearly all of the stones now missing. Promotional items from the show included a CBS matchbook with a drawing of Rob, Sally, and Buddy, a Dick Van Dyke Show coloring book, a board game, and a Dick Van Dyke Show tumbler glass. Dick Van Dyke is widely recognized for his artistic ability, and his drawings frequently found their way onto the show. This sketch done by Dick of The Wizard of Oz, however, hangs in the home of Julie Paris, Jerry's daughter. Dick's characters often graced cast and crew gifts. These included a cast ashtray, decks of playing cards, and a set of Dick Van Dyke cufflinks. In addition, there was also a Dick Van Dyke Show music box with an arrangement that was carefully crafted by musician Earl Hagen. Larry Matthews has a one-of-a-kind Dick Van Dyke Show item which came into being during the show's final cast party after the filming of The Gunslinger.
So at the end of at the wrap party, we were kind of getting stuff, and they were just sitting there, and my mom went up and she grabbed the poster, and it's got the dart holes in it. So it's the one that they used on set. And she said, asked the prop master if I could have it, of course. And she made me go to every cast and crew member and get it signed. So it is signed by the entire cast and crew of the Dick Van Dyke Show around Carl's picture as Big Bad Brady.
Most recently, the National Comedy Center has been the recipient of various Dick Van Dyke Show related items. The families of Rose Marie and John Rich have graciously given large portions of their archives to the center. Prior to his passing, Carl Reiner had donated all of his Dick Van Dyke Show scripts to the center, along with a toupee or two. Since his passing, Carl's family has decided to donate all of Carl's archives to the Comedy Center. The center's most recent acquisition came from Larry Matthews, who donated the famous Alan Brady desk to the museum's permanent collection.
The desk is going to be great there, along with everything else that Rose and John Rich and Carl have given. It'll be a real welcome addition, and it'll be really a great spot for it to be.
Coming up, a special tribute to Dick Van Dyke.
If you've enjoyed the Dick Van Dyke Show throughout the years, in celebration of the show's 60th anniversary, please consider making a donation to St. Jude Children's Research Hospital. And Colac will appreciate it as well.
Well, hello there, Mr. Van Dyke, and all you wonderful fans of the Dick Van Dyke Show. My name is Gavin Lee, and I had the privilege for 8 years to play the role of Bert the Chimney Sweep in Mary Poppins, on stage in London and on Broadway, a role which of course was made iconic by you, Dick, back in the 1960s movie. Well, I'm just honoured to be here helping to celebrate the 60th anniversary of your fabulous show, and so I thought I would contribute by singing a little song that you sang in, I believe, Series 3, Episode 19. Enjoy. When I grow up, I want to be a very famous clown and have the people laugh at me when the circus comes to town. I'll make them glad when they are sad. I'll chase away each frown. I'll blink my nose and tip my hat when the circus comes to town. And when you hear the old calliope, you'll watch me and you'll laugh. I'll jump on a seal and roll like a wheel and stretch my neck like a big giraffe. I hope you'll see me when I'm shown, when I become a clown. Next year when I am fully grown, when the circus comes to town. A 5, 6, 7. I hope you'll see me when I'm shown, when I become a clown. Next year when I am fully grown, when the circus comes to town. Congratulations, Dick. 60 years. All the best. Love you. Bye-bye.
As we culminate our celebration of this anniversary, here's a toast to the entire Dick Van Dyke Show family. Thanks for 60 years of fabulous entertainment, and we look forward to many more. With our sense of humor still intact, we offer a giant thumbs up. We leave the final word to the man himself.
It's still the finest, funniest 5 years of my life. 'cause I'm the kind of a guy that'll loosen my tie, stay out all night on the floor, 'cause I love to hear you say, encore, encore. Damn it, I missed it by that much.